Hi, everyone. I'm Surita Bains. Well, this conference is focused on product management. I'm hoping this talk can actually help you in all aspects of your life. And that's because there are few, if any, areas that don't involve communication. Obviously, in your work life as a product manager, you need to be a good communicator, but also with your family and your friends' relationships, with your teammates on any sport team you're on, or your kids' teachers or healthcare workers that are helping take care of your parents. So the list goes on and on. Communication is key in virtually all aspects of your life. So that's not new to anyone here. But what I am hoping to do is to expand the way that you think about communication, how you think about listening, how you understand. So, today we're going to talk about how to truly understand someone. That is, how you do it and how to test that you've done it. So, my baseline assumption here is that everyone grasps the importance of understanding. That as product management people, one of the fundamental things that we have to do is to understand. That's our customers, our market, our organization, and our strategy. So, the goal of this talk is for you to walk away with a richer picture of what it means and what it takes to understand someone. So, I frame the how as 360-degree communication. And like it sounds, it's about hearing, seeing, and conveying it from all sides. So, to start, this is something that hopefully everyone is familiar with. So, let's talk about the communication feedback loop. So, this is well established. There's a lot of research and already done on this. The basic model goes that there is a sender who sends a message, and that's either written or verbal or otherwise. It could be body language. And then you've got a receiver who receives the message. They process it, interpret it, and then they send a response or feedback to the sender. And that feedback could be anything. It could be, I received your message and nothing else. It could be, here's what I think about your message, or I've decided on A if it was a question. So that's the feedback loop. Um, Now, this works. This is not broken. That's not what I'm here to say. We need to send and receive messages, right? We need to communicate. And you need to listen to do this, whether you're the sender or the receiver. But how do you know that you're understanding? How do you know that what you've understood is actually what the other person is trying to convey? There is no understanding in this model. So, what I'm suggesting is the communication feedback loop is great for communicating and it's great for listening, but there's no understanding in this model. So, what is 360-degree communication? Well, it's a lot of things. Um, it's communicating to someone, it's listening to them, it's interpreting what they've said, conveying back to them what you've heard lots of times in more than one way. And it's actively asking them, is that accurate? Um, it's also about understanding their message so well that you can communicate it effectively to another person. That if the original sender of that message heard that other person, they'd fully agree. This is a benchmark or a goal I sort of set with my product team all the time. I say, when you learn something from a customer, a pain point, anything that you think is important for you to convey, and then you're trying to explain that, for example, to engineering, your goal is to have engineering understand it so well that if the customer heard engineering describing it, the customer to go like, are you part of the company? Like, do you work with me? Because it is spot on in conveying what the customer was intending to say. So 360-degree communication is listening and understanding, but understanding the message so well that you can convey it as well as the sender. So why is it so important, in particular for product managers? So that is because we are meant to be the voice of the customer, right? We are meant to be so close to the customer that we can talk about their pain points and their needs just as well as a customer. Um, To be obsessed with your customer means understanding them with richness and fullness of what they're trying to convey to you. And then for you to be able to convey it to others. And that is where the power comes in. When you can convey that understanding to engineering or marketing or leadership, that is really the power of product management. Um, so to be clear, I am not saying learn to repeat the customer. Um, we of course have to decide what customer needs that we want to solve for. I always say too, customers just don't get whatever they ask for, right? And how they want it to be done. We have to go through the exercise of what pain point do we want to solve? What pain point can we uniquely solve in our product? But once you've made that decision, you want to get wickedly good at conveying that understanding and validating that understanding. So all of that is really 360-degree communication. So discovery is a really critical part of product management. It's what we do, right? And there's a lot of discovery techniques. There's customer interviews and the 5 whys. The list goes on. But I'm going to encourage all of you to think about 360-degree communication as another tool in that kit. It takes things like the 5 whys, which help you learn a customer problem, and you pair that with 360 communication, and it helps you truly understand and validate your understanding. So now I'm going to explain to you why I'm so passionate about this, and I'm going to tell you a story about how I epically failed. So years ago, I had the opportunity to be with an organization and we were asked to build something quite late in a cycle, but it would be preloaded and shipped with millions of mobile devices. So again, this is late in the device's build and launch cycle. And so we had some direction of what the manufacturer was looking for, but there was a lot of gray of how it would work with the actual device and the other services. So a small team, we traveled to Seoul, Korea to figure out what they wanted, but to actually build it and to see if we could just pull it all together for the launch of that device. And if you've never been involved with the launch of a consumer device like this before, it's like a freight train. There is a lot of momentum. So that train is moving and that train is leaving that station at X time. And either you're on or you're off the train. And there's nothing that we could do to change the time of that train. So we were definitely under a little bit of pressure. We thought we would be there for a few days or maybe a week, and we ended up being there for a month. So what that looked like was we would go to the Samsung campus in the day. We'd meet with that team there. We'd work on the app, and in the evening, we'd typically go back to our room and we'd continue to work on it through the night. And so we'd work on the requirements and the design and actually building it. So you see Karen there; she was our engineer. Um, and that's what we would do. And there were a lot of moving parts. But the core of the app was really being defined and designed by Karen, the engineer, and myself. So we spent all day and most of the nights talking through it. If you can see, there's some large poster size paper by the desk. We would write up designs and workflows and requirements. It was very intense and very collaborative. But the thing to remember is we did it side by side. We were in all the same meetings and all the same discussions. We were hearing the same thing and we were hearing each other. So we were truly glued at the hip. Um, then the problem. So late one night, we were working through things like we did every night, and my mind was blown. So we're looking at this workflow. You can see it handwritten type diagram and talking about something. And as we're talking through it, I say, yeah, but after this action, this gets triggered. So what if we did, XYZ? And Karen says, no, it doesn't. And I say, yes, it does. And she's like, no. And I looked at her as if I didn't recognize her. It was like, who is this stranger sitting beside me on the carpet, eating French fries way too late? Um, and as we unpacked it, I learned that not only was the design different than what I had thought, but it had never been what I had thought. I had misunderstood Karen from the beginning. She has always thought it was X, and I has always thought it was Y. That weeks after working through this with her side by side, I still had not understood. I had misunderstood. Um, and this experience really shook me. I still think about it. Um, so much so that when an email comes through that looks for speakers for conferences for things like this is the thing that I want to talk about. And this night was 10 years ago. And I have this picture because this stuck with me so profoundly. And some of that is personal because when I think I know something, I think I really know it. I am so confident in it. Um, so this experience opened my eyes to all the other things that I was missing. Because if I could miss this, what else was I missing? And, the next few weeks, months, years, I realized that I wasn't actually understanding everything as well as I thought. And the problem was that my confidence had blinded me to my blind spots. So, it's great to be confident and it's great to be confident in what you know. I say to my team all the time, right? Advocate for what you know, explain what you know. If you've got the data, if you've got the analysis, if you've got an opinion, be the best advocate of that. Um, but the work to really understand something is much deeper than listening. Um, it can take more effort than you think, and it needs validation, and it can be an evolving practice. And that's something I'm hoping that I'm trying to convey to you here today. So, the experience that I just talked about, that was with a colleague, right? An engineer. So, when I talk about 360-degree communication, it's not just with customers, it's with anybody, right? Your product team, your UI or UX person, customer success or sales, anyone that you're interacting with. There is opportunity to misunderstand everywhere. So the good thing is, there's always that opportunity to work to actively understand and validate your understanding. So hopefully at this point, you've got a good picture of what I mean when I talk about understanding and why I think it's so critical for product managers and in reality for lots of other aspects of your life. And hopefully you understand a bit about 360-degree communication. But let's get into some specifics of what that looks like. But I'm going to ask that you all play along. So I'm going to share what it looks like for me and tips and examples. But product managers, you are all a super resourceful group. And I'm going to guess that you all actually have ways that you do this today. Maybe call it something else, but this is maybe resonating on, well, I do this to solve for not understanding. I'm needing to validate my understanding. So my ask is that you share in the chat. Share what works for you, what's successful, or if you have an idea, put it in the chat. Let's have a conversation. I would love to hear, and I'd love to share that with this group. So for the next few tactics, we're going to use just this super simple model. There is a sender, typically you in this the receiver, which is typically you, and then there's a sender, and there's also another person. So the first tactic is very simple. It's ask, right? I don't think this is actually anything revolutionary. The sender sends a message, you as a receiver, is what you meant XYZ? But you are actively asking, right? You're not assuming. So just want to remind everyone that's always a good tip. Do that whenever necessary. Then there's parrot. And this is a bit different than ask. And this is about you asking, can I repeat back what I heard? Can I repeat back what I understood? And you don't necessarily always want to use the same terms and words and phrasing that they did because it's not saying, let me repeat exactly the words that you said, but you're trying to convey your understanding and have them validate. So you're putting them in the mindset that their job is to understand you now and then say, yes, no, where is it different? Where is some different color or context coming in? So that's parroting. Then there's explain to someone new. So now we introduce a new person to the party. So the sender has explained something to you. And then in front of the sender, you explain to another person, this is what the sender is saying. You explain it to them in front of the sender. And what that does is a couple of things. One, you get to practice at your explanation um, of what the message is, of your understanding. But then it also gives the sender opportunity to hear it and validate it. Is that right? Is that slightly off? Or you're missing this piece, which is key. They can do that when they hear you talk about it. Something to keep in mind with this tactic and with the next few, which does involve another person, is like anything in your toolkit, when is the right time to use it? So, if you are working with somebody and talking with somebody who doesn't like confrontation, who, it's hard for them to speak up, you may not want to do this on an email thread with 15 people because they may not correct you, right? And with them not correcting, that then becomes the understanding and the meaning. And that is absolutely not what you want. So you think about the personalities and the communication styles of the people you're working with, and then which is the right tactics to use. But this can be really effective. So the next one is someone new validates. So in this scenario, the sender has already explained, the message to you. You've done your job to understand, and now they're not there. You explain it to someone new, right? What the sender is saying is X, Y, Z, and then the second step is that other person then explains it to the sender. Sender, what you're saying is X, Y, Z, but they do that in front of you. So again, you get to hear, is the sender able to validate your message, and were you able to explain it as well as you needed to that other person? And then we have hear it for a new audience, which I actually really love this one. So this is about shaking up the perspectives a little bit. You may already understand it as well as you can, but you might ask, "Hey sender, can you explain it to this new person in the situation?" And you, with a tactic, might want to be thoughtful about who is the right type or context of person. So, is it customer success? Is it sales? Maybe you're working on something collaborative and there's a third party and you want the partners involved. Because the sender will then explain it to that other person, but them knowing the orientation of that person, they might use different framing. They might use a different way. They might add different color for the role that that person's in, the piece that they have to play. And that may be something that you haven't heard before, right? So then you get a richer picture, a better understanding. So this one can really be effective, but you got to think a little bit about who are the right people to pull in so that you can get a more colorful picture of what the sender is trying to explain. So in all of those, we had, sender, receiver, and other person. I just want to remind you that there could be lots of other people. It could be one person, it could be a group, and they could all have different perspectives and come from different places of frames of reference. And again, that's something that's to be helpful to think about when you're using these tactics, because that will go to give you a richer picture on that understanding. So there are some other tactics I'd love to share as well. Um, The first one isn't actually really specific to 360 communication. I think it's just for communication as a whole. And I call it building your dictionary. It is fundamentally important that when you're talking with someone that you have the same definitions, the same meanings on things. So sometimes you have to ask and clarify or say, when I say this, so when I'm talking about the channel, this is what that means to me. Someone else might have a different association or definition of that, right? So flush those things out. Just be really clear about what it means when you say certain phrases or words so you're all speaking from the same dictionary. The next one is a fun one, but it definitely takes practice. So listen to listen. Stop the internal dialogue. And what that means is whenever any of us communicate and we're listening, we all start thinking, right? We have the internal dialogue start. We could be processing, interpreting, and that's natural. And you might start forming an opinion or coming to a conclusion. You can start coming up with questions, right? Oh, I got to ask you this and this and this because I didn't totally get it. And that's fine, right? We all need to do that. That's just how our brains work. But there are times when the conversation is going to get to a place where you want to silence that internal dialogue so you can truly listen. You want to get really quiet internally so you're listening for the active listening. And I can promise you, you are going to pick up on more when you do that because your brain's not going to be distracted with your internal dialogue. You're going to pick up on little nuances and other things when you listen. So you can't do this all the time, but when something is really important or maybe complex, where you're hearing it for the first time, you really might want to say, okay, I'm going to put in the work to stop that internal dialogue. The next one is actually from an individual called Bob London. So Bob calls himself the Chief Listening Officer, which is a kind of fun title. So these are his ideas. Definitely full credit to Bob. Um, and what he talks about is the fact that sometimes when you're in the discovery phase, customers get used to questions, right? They know what they're going to get asked and they know the order in which they're going to get asked. And they kind of are used to this is the answer that they want to hear from me. So he talks about disrupting the thought pattern of who you're talking with so that you get them out of that routine and that you hear a fresh answer or maybe something with a little bit more insight or a little bit more richness. And a way that he suggests that you do that is by asking radically authentic questions. And he has these listed out and they're available. So I encourage you to go Google Bob London and radically authentic questions and you can see the full list that he has. And they're really great to again have in your toolkit to disrupt that thought pattern from whoever you're talking to so that you might ask a question that they've never heard before and they actually have to stop and think and go, well, what is the answer to that? And you might hear something that they didn't know and no one else knows, which is always, great insight. Then we have validating over time. So this is about the fact that you can put in the work, right? You can put in the effort to understanding someone and something. And then you'll understand it as of that moment in time. And that's great. Maybe it's now 3 or 4 months later and you're needing to make a decision about it or act on it. There could be times that you need to go and validate that your understanding is still accurate because we all know the world changes, right? The markets change, customers' perspectives change, new people come and go and can influence opinions. So just because you understand something doesn't mean it's the forever truth. Um, Understanding it as of a moment of time, and you may need to come back and revalidate that if you think it's necessary. And the last one is considering perspective. So, like the first one, I don't think this is specific to 360-degree style of communication, but key anytime. It's taking into mind the frame of reference, the perspective, the position of who you are communicating with, because all of that will allow you to think more deeply about what they're saying, maybe what they're missing, how they're framing things up. So always take perspective into mind. So to recap, here is a summary of the tactics. There is ask, right? Just be active, an active participant in your communication and ask for validation on your understanding. There's parroting. Explain your understanding back and say, is that right? Is that accurate? You could always explain it to someone new in front of the sender and see if there's any course corrections or validations there. You can explain it to someone new and then have that person explain it to the sender and see, that full 360 cycle. Is it working? Is it effective? We all have the right understanding here. Then you've got hear it for a new audience. So that relates a little bit to perspective, right? Hear it explained to somebody else, and maybe you'll hear it with a different ear because it's intended for a different audience. You can always make sure you build your dictionary, right? Have your definitions aligned so you're talking the same talk, you're speaking the same language. Listen to listen. Again, this is a hard one, and I know this. I'm not good at this all the time, especially in my personal life. I know that. But it is important and it helps. So when it is important enough, quiet your internal dialogue, and listen to listen. Disrupt those thought patterns. If you're working with a focus group or a cab and they're used to the same questions over and over again, think about how you can disrupt their patterns. You might get a fresh answer. Um, Validating over time. So, understanding is accurate as a point in time, and you might need to validate it if time has passed. And then finally, perspective. Think about the frames of reference and the frames of mind of all the folks that you're having in that communication cycle. So I really hope that those are helpful for you. And no good talk is complete without an inspirational quote. So I did find this one and I thought it was really great. There is a great difference between knowing and understanding. You can know a lot about something and not really understand it. And I cannot agree with that more. And I think that the older I get, the more I realize the less I understand. And so the more effort and work I put into understanding things. Um, Something also we were asked to think about is what is a mantra? What is something you'd want folks listening to this talk to leave with? And I cheated and I came up with two. Um, and that's that understanding takes work, but the effort is worth it. And it's beyond listening, right? So if there's one of two things that you take from this, it's just that to truly understand something or someone, it takes a lot of effort. And the second mantra is the why. And that's because I really do believe that if a team truly understands their customer, their market, their pain point, how they can uniquely solve it, how they're positioned to delight a customer in a specific way, um, that if everyone in the team understands that and they have a drive to solve that customer's problem and make their life better, that there is nothing that team can't do. That success is absolutely going to be at your door. Um, so this all connects for me about the value of understanding, the fact that it takes effort, the effort is worth it, and what it results in is delighting your customers because you truly understand your customer. So I'm excited to see what's going on in the chat. Hopefully, they have some good conversation. And I really appreciate you being here today and spending this time with me. So thanks, everyone, and we will chat soon. Take care, all.